This is the now infamous chess speaks for itself game. Now, if you don't know the details of all the drama surrounding this game and the events that followed, then I'll link a video at the end which explains it all, but right now we'll kick on with the high quality, high drama chess which we saw in this game. So this is the Crypto Cup. It's an online play, but the players are sat opposite each other. This was played 16th of August. Magnus has white, hands black. Let's see what happened. So e4 from Magnus, c5 the Sicilian defence, knight f3, and after knight c6, Magnus goes bishop to b5, the Rossolimo variation. Now we had g6, the most common way to respond. Magnus castles, bishop g7, rook e1, and now Magnus is preparing to go pawn e5 here, a cramping move, and Hans walks straight into it with knight to f6. Because now when that move comes, he does find a home on this d5 square, and Magnus carries on developing, but Hans doesn't take that knight. If you chop off here, then after pawn recaptures, white's getting a really nice grip on the position. You've opened the d file here, making it hard to play something like d6, for example, even after you've castled, plus this pawn now takes control of d4. So here we had the knight dropping back. Now it does attack this bishop, and Magnus just chops on c6. So you shatter the pawn structure in compensation for giving the bishop, very common idea, and white's really playing with tempo now, initiative, so you attack this pawn immediately, it's defended with b6, and now Magnus plays this check here. So a sneaky line using advantage of this rook staring down at the king, because now if you capture, pawn takes with check, king goes, well, materials level here, but after something like b3, we can see that this king will be getting cut shreds on the dark squares in this variation. So Hans doesn't actually take that knight, best move, he just sidesteps the king. Now the knight drops back because it was on prise, and now bishop g4. So a good developing move, and this pawn is now being pressured, but Magnus goes d3. And it looks like you can simply take this pawn and win that outright. But the problem here is white's got this beautiful knight takes on e5. So you can give up your whole queen here, because the trick is you can now start hunting this king. And after it moves to g8, best move. If you come to e8, then it's a bit worse because you're running into some tactics down here. Well, now white's got this knight takes on c6 move. And it's all just flowing together. The queen's just really short of squares, basically. So say you go to d7 here to keep an eye on this pawn. You know, knight takes there is actually a threat of checkmate because of this bishop. Well, now this is the trick. Again, you throw in this knight f6 check. Taking is forced. Now you check here. You have to give up the queen. And white's just doing really well in this variation. You're about to win back one of these minor pieces here, and then look at the sorry state of this king boxing in the rook. You know, clearly white's for choice. So these are all the problems with taking that pawn on e5 with the bishop. Really, really nice tactical stuff. So of course the players are aware of this. So Hans instead goes knight to e6 here, and now Magnus does have to do something about that pawn. Bishop takes on e5 is a threat now, because with the knight on e6, you block the e-file for the rook, and so none of those same tactics are working. So this is why the knight now hops into g5, opens up this rook's protection. Now we had chops here from Hans, bishop recaptures, and queen d5. Nice centralizing move. And Magnus now counters, rook e4. He blocks the queen's attack on this knight. You know, there could have been a threat to take twice there, shatter the pawns. He also hits this bishop. And again, you don't want to be taking here, because after queen takes, although again you can win a pawn, it's not actually very good, because you're opening the e-file here and your king is still very exposed. So queen e3 is a good example of a move that could be played. You can also go rook e1 there. Queen e3 is best. And if the bishop goes somewhere, we're crashing through. If you go pawn f6, well, then we can just double up the rooks, or triple up even on that file, because if you take, we take, you know, this kind of thing. And if you just play a waiting move like this, you can also go king f7. Well, now we drop back the bishop. Still, there's tons of pressure. You're winning the pawn back with advantage. So this is why chopping that knight on f3, trying to win the pawn once again, is no good. Bishop drops back instead was played, and now here Magnus plays a very committal move. and not a great move really. Now, if you run it with the engines, it's actually one of the top moves, pawn c4. But the problem with this is it's really hard for Magnus to arrange pawn breaks after that, plus this d3 pawn is backwards. So one line I slightly prefer here for white, again it's the top engine line here of going rook to e3, is after this move is played, then if black goes for h6, g5, all of that kind of stuff which we see in the game, well with this pawn still being well defended with the c2 pawn, now you can go for things like a4, a5, or one day even swing this rook to f1 and then play for an f4 pawn break. So some deep stuff, but that would have seemed to be the best way for white to go. But c4 played, kicks the queen back, now the rook drops, but this pawn's now got to be babysat for all of the rest of the game. So h6 kick this bishop, it drops back, g5, bishop g3, and now the king starts running in just a moment here. It wants to make its way all the way to h7 and then connects these rooks. Meanwhile, Magnus is now getting his pawn break on the queen side going, but we'll see the problem with this is that Hans doesn't even have to respond. He just doubles his rooks, lets Magnus shatter his pawns because it's actually really difficult for this one to be picked up. I mean, you could go queen a4, a5 or queen d2, a5, but even if you mop that one up, then this one's going to be critically weak. This is the kind of thing you're trading off. So queen b3 was played here, prepares to bring the rook across. Now this one doubled, rook d1, queen g6 adds more pressure here, and so Magnus drops back with the knight. He actually had a really nice shot here to try and mix up the game, so he could have gone pawn to e6, a pawn sacrifice, but you clear the e5 square, you can jump in with the knight, fork these two pieces, forces the dark squared bishop to give up, and okay, at least you've actually liberated the position a bit. You've got opposite coloured bishops there. There could be some drawing chances. So that was quite a nice shot. But knight e1 played, much more natural move, covers that pawn. Hans now goes pawn h5, gaining that space. He wants to start attacking the white king, and now Magnus comes back. Looks really weird, but he's setting a trap here, because if Hans now takes this pawn, it's no longer defended adequately, then after everything liquidates like this, the sting at the end of the tail is knight takes on g5 with check. A decoy move, because if the queen captures, then we pick up the piece, this is check, and white's actually a bit better. So you don't want to be allowing any of this stuff. Hans correctly doesn't cash in yet, he doesn't take that pawn. He instead goes pawn h4 here, kicks back the bishop, and now e6. Everything's rock solid. Magnus is sweating, he has to sit and suffer. So queen c3 played. He'd love to get d4 in if he possibly can. So bishop f8 was played, plays against the d4 break, because now if you go for it, well again, after everything opens up here, say you get a liquidation like this, well then bishop c5 can come. Really awkward to defend this one, and if you take on c6, well we can check down here. After blocks, this is the best move. There's actually big problems trying to defend this back rank. The king's actually boxed in by its own bishop, so I won't go deeper on the line, but it's about -10 for black to give you a sense of how bad it is for white. So you can't go d4. Magnus didn't play it. Again, he drops with knight e1, covers that pawn. g4 now from Hans. There's no need to protect this pawn anymore. The knight's left the square. He starts cranking open that white monarch, and now takes on g4 was played. Bishop recaptures, hits this rook, and so Magnus goes f3. He picks up a tempo and then pushes f4. And it's difficult to find good moves, to be honest, for Magnus. So at least now his knight can come back to f3, but Hans just continues very calmly now. Bishop to h6. Its job is done there, preventing d4. So it now switches to eyeing this pawn. There's no d4 here because the knight's not on f3 supporting it. So Magnus goes queen a5. He's desperate to get counterplay here on the queen side, but queen g4. All the pieces now swarming around the white king. You hit this unprotected rook, and Magnus blunders now. So his best move here was rook to d2. I imagine intuitively he didn't much like the look of leaving the back rank, because now, for example, you can go rook b8, you're threatening rook b1, that looks very nasty, still decent advantage to black. So he goes rook f3 instead, but he'd overlooked a tactic here. If you want to pause and look for the best move, then please do so. So the move that Hans plays here is bishop to e4. Really nice tactic, because if you take, you lose your rook here, and you can't actually move the rook. Say you go rook to f2, trying to cover the mate, then you can actually take this one here. I say cover the mate, the knight's also covering it, but anyway, then you lose your unprotected rook, so you can't even move that rook. So the queen took on c5, Hans picks up the exchange, knight takes, and now pawn h3. Big problems for Magnus. He goes queen f2, covers this mate from the queen and pawn. Now we had rook takes on d3. The whole thing's collapsing, as we can see. Rook takes, now knight e1. This knight's just absolutely back and forth like a yo-yo between f3 and e1. Really miserable, and Hans just chops on a3. Completely crushing position, but he has to finish it off. Queen b2, hits that rook. It slides back to e3 here, hitting this knight, and it's really difficult to find good moves. If you come here with the knight, well, we chop. You can't actually take back because of the pin. If you come here, of course, we're taking. If you come to c2, well, now you block the queen's protection from this checkmating threat, and you can't defend the knight with the queen, or then we just lop it off the board. Queen recaptures. Again, you're getting mated at the end of the line. So this is why Magnus, he defends it with the king here, but now Hans just crashes through. There's different winning moves. He plays bishop takes on f4, and Magnus resigned. It's all over. The king's just getting hunted. I mean, say, for example, you capture that one. Well, we can take with check. If the knight blocks, then we can even give up the rook here, because after pawn recaptures, this is a really nice skewer at the end of the line. King goes, you pick up the queen. So a crushing game by Hans, and then in an interview afterwards, that's where he now famously said, the chess speaks for itself. So I've done a whole video about that and the drama that followed in the Sinquefield Cup and in the last couple of weeks. If you want to check that one out, it's on screen now, or alternatively, if you want to see the other famous game between Hans Niemann and Magnus Carlsen that they played in the Sinquefield Cup, then that's also on screen now. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you soon.